Hello, hello, hello. Welcome, intrepid interstellar travelers. My name is Kolu Poli, and this is District 216, the intersection of art, music, cannabis, consciousness, and psychedelics. Today, we are super lucky to have Gerardo Urias, who's written a book called Take Back My Mind, My Journey Out of Depression with Psilocybin Mushrooms. So I'm looking forward to Gerardo telling me all sorts of interesting things about his intrepid journey, and we could please give him a round of applause.
Thank you. I'm very, very happy to be here. This is a wonderful, wonderful thing that you guys are doing here.
So first off, I read your book. I think you all should read it. It was actually a fantastic read. It's only about like 180 pages. You could definitely do it in a week. A lot of overview of psychedelic culture, the evolution of mind, how psychedelics can rewire our mind. And, you know, after reading it, you've lived a really interesting life. You're an adventure sports guy. You've done tons of skiing on psychedelics, which I think is uniquely cool. Would you mind? And also, too, you've been at incredible highs and incredible lows. Could you just give us a little bit of a brief overview of, you know, how you ended up on this stage with us today?
Yes, the first time I tried mushrooms was right out of high school when I was 18, actually. And that was the beginning of my relationship with mushrooms that then, when I moved to Europe to start skiing on mushrooms, that continued for a few years. And then I took a break from mushrooms for a long time and fell into depression. And many years later, they saved me from depression. But I've had a relationship with mushrooms ever since I was 18. That is why I'm here today, to spread the knowledge on the power of these mushrooms to lift us out of these depressive states that we can get into later in life when events happen and things sink us, because it's very, very powerful. It's the only thing that was able to lift me out of that, about 5 years ago.
So skiing on mushrooms, are you better or worse? Or have you skied on other drugs that are interesting?
It depends how many grams.
So what's a fun amount of, mushrooms to go skiing on for all those skiing, adventure enthusiasts? Like heroic skiing?
I would not suggest it, for one. I'm going to talk about that a little bit in my presentation, actually.
Okay, we don't have to cover that.
Yeah, you'll hear about it for sure.
So growing up, I think mentors are super important, and you seem like a really knowledgeable person in many different aspects of life. Who were some of those mentors that helped you grow into the person that you now are?
Well, Tim Ferriss is actually one of my first mentors that really changed my life when I got married, and really influenced me to revamp my life. His book, The 4-Hour Work Week, it popped out at me when I was walking through Barnes and Nobles one day, and reading through it, it really resonated with me from my days living in Europe. That the linear path of work, it isn't quite as fulfilling as we might hope, and so it really influenced me. His idea of mini retirements and of thinking of different forms of currency other than money, mainly being time is your most valuable currency. So really flipping the script on how we think of currency and life and how to live life. And since most of my youth was spent traveling and skiing on mushrooms sometimes, those were the, I really realized that experiences is what life is all about. And so that really was the first book and the first mentor that I had that really started shifting things for me. Before the depression, this is when I was married, that led me and my wife to sell everything and move to Panama and start a business. And then, life went on, and then we got divorced and the depression happened. But I would say Tim Ferriss is definitely one of the first mentors. And then later in life is all the philosophical mentors that you read about in the book. So to this day, the biggest mentors I have are Marcus Aurelius, Seneca, Epictetus, the Stoics. I really study them and how they lived life and how they view life, how they view challenges. And so those are my main mentors, I would say.
And so you read the 4-Hour Work Week.
Yes.
What did you do with that? You read how did it actually impact your daily routine, how you structured your week? Did you just work 4 hours and then go skiing on shrooms the rest of the time? Or
no. No, that led me to quit my job ultimately. Me and my wife were toiling away at work. I was working 10, 12-hour days, and it's really resonated with me that we aren't here to work our whole lives, you know. And the the idea of just stopping that mode of existence and taking a break from that and stepping outside, you know, stepping outside the box, stepping outside of the U.S. And going and living life to rejuvenate the soul and to really that really opens your mind to other forms of living and viewing life in a different way of, you know, again, the currency, what is important in life. You know, it's not just about money. You know, we tend to equate work with money, but time, relationships, experiences are the most valuable thing, I believe.
So, I mean, you have these retreats, you wrote a book, you work with individuals as well on a
Yes.
one-to-one basis?
Yes, I do. Very much so.
So how did that play into well, money's not necessarily the most important thing in my life, but helping people could be. How does that translate into when you started helping people, when you knew you had the potential to help people, you know, in these larger ways in which you've discussed in your book?
Yes, that definitely started after my liberation from the depression. You know, that day when in less than 24 hours, my depression was lifted to depression. There was really a suicidal depression for 10 months that I wasn't able to get out of. And so going through that experience where you really try everything to get out of depression and you just can't do it. And then something comes along like these mushrooms, and then the next day it's lifted. It's so profound and so magical that I couldn't keep it to myself. It's I feel it's a responsibility. It's my responsibility to share this knowledge. I feel as though I was gifted a second chance in life so that I can help others do the same. You know, so I view that as now as my work. You know, we're talking about a big span of time. Of course, we're talking the skiing and all that was 20, 25 years ago. But over the last 5 years, that is my work. My currency is helping other people and watching the transformation, watching the lights come on in people's eyes. That's priceless. That's worth so much more than any amount of money at all. You know, so that's kind of the mindset that I'm in now as far as work. Like my work is helping people. And I do get paid for it, and I get paid well when I do the retreats and I do the one-on-ones. But it is not about the money for me at all.
So you were in the trenches. You were, from your book, correct me if I'm wrong, but it said essentially on the brink of suicide.
Yes.
What do you tell someone that's standing on a ledge? I mean, it sounds like potentially maybe explore psilocybin, but what would you say to someone factually or in a helpful way to help them understand themselves and how they fit into the universe?
Yes, that's a really good question. The way I describe it many times is because I know that state of mind. I still remember it. I know the darkness. I know the depth of the darkness. I know the inescapability, which is, that's one of the main fabrics of trauma, is the element of inescapability. And that's pretty much across the board, all trauma. And so when you are in that place, it's a construct, it's a story. Our identity is a story that we string along our entire lives. And when it's that strong of a story that you can't get out and you are certain that the only way out is death, there's some reality to that, very much so. I always tell people that when it's a suicidal depression of that caliber, that death is actually the only way out. And there's two choices. It's either death of the physical body or death of the mental construct telling the story. And that is the sad reality of the fact. That's why it's imperative that we harness these plant medicines and allow these other options to get out of these. Because if we don't kill the mental construct, as we know through statistics, there's over 3,000 people who kill themselves every day across the world. Those are people who are killing the physical body because they weren't able to kill the mental construct. So it's kind of a harsh, that's kind of the conversation I have with people who are in that zone. It's not going to end well. So those are the two choices, you know, and I always opt for kill the construct.
In your book, you said you are who you are until you identify differently. Could you describe what that means and maybe the role psychedelics can assist you in transforming the way in which you perceive yourself?
Definitely, that kind of touches on the same idea, the identity in that point. When you're at the end of your rope, again, it's a story, and so you're you're clinging to that story so strongly, and so that identity is again what has to be. It has to be killed. It has to be detached, and you have to create a new identity, essentially. And the thing about identity is attachment. Of course, this goes back to Buddhist philosophy, and it goes very deep. But the reality is, the only identity that we have is the identity that we cling to in the present moment and carry forward, because we're continually changing. We're not the same people physically that we were. We can break it down that we know we're not the same person we were when we were 5 years old, right? We were smaller. We were a lot lighter. The cells in our body were different. Our cells are continually shedding, dying, and being reborn. So physically, our physical construct, we are constantly evolving. Our physical construct is not the same as it was even last year. It's an entirely new process that we have. So that's also psychologically. However, because of the mind and default mode that we're in, we cling on to those identities, and then we carry through that through our whole life, but we don't have to. So we can create any identity we want if we can step out of our default mode of that attachment. And so essentially what I did with the mushrooms was, that day on December 22nd, back in 2017, is create a new identity. So I experienced going from a suicidal person to the next day being a pretty happy person. And so I experienced that. So that is this complete shifting of two identities, same person in those 24 hours, completely new identity. So we have the choice to change the identity. We don't have to carry the identity forward.
Did you go into that experience with a little sticky note that said change identity? Or was that just kind of potentially a divine interaction where, God gave you this opportunity to help so many people? I mean, what was that?
I can absolutely say that it was divine intervention, yes. Definitely, yeah.
And so we've talked about darkness. You mentioned Viktor Frankl in your book. He wrote Man's Search for Meaning. He says you don't choose if you suffer, you choose how you suffer. How does that relate to, say, inner shadow work, the psychedelic experience, your own battles with depression or anxiety or suicidality and things like that?
Yes, that is touches on the Stoic philosophy that I follow as well, on creating that space. Viktor Frankl, the first quote that really got me to get interested in him was between a stimulus and a response is a space, and in that space is our freedom to choose our response. In our response lies our freedom. So it's the idea of slowing everything down to the present moment, comes down to acting upon the present moment and realizing again that that's the only reality we have. And in that moment is actually infinity. In that moment, you have an infinite potential of possibilities that you can create. That's where you can create new identities. That's where you can create new dreams and new philosophies to follow. And so if you can tap into that present moment, that's where you have the infinite choices, And so I was just so amazed that somebody who lived through the Holocaust could actually find mental freedom. And that's what drew me to him in the first place. And that, I continue to try and live by that philosophy, that we always have the choice to suffer. Pain is real, but suffering is optional.
I think there's a Stoic line that says, love your fate. How does that relate to that moment in between, moving left or right, that freedom, that present moment? How do you learn to love your fate? And what would you tell someone? I want to love my fate. Many people, I feel like, maybe wish they could. But you can't force something on anyone, really, at least in my experience. They have to kind of accept it and welcome it and bring it in. What is the process of instructing someone in those directions?
Well, that's why I carry this coin here. This says amor fati. It is based on that Stoic philosophy. It's Latin for love your fate, So when I was first lifted out of my depression, I came across this article about Stoic philosophy, and it led me to these two coins. The other one I'll show you in a bit. But this really struck me as a powerful idea. On the back it says, not merely to bear what is necessary, but love it. And so for me, I was so enthralled to just be out of depression that and I couldn't believe the shift that happened, that mental shift. And I thought, if I could shift my mind so much, so dramatically, a 180 from being that dark place to being complete opposite the next day, then I can do that whenever I want. Of course, that was through the help of the psilocybin. But I immediately got into breath work. I got into philosophy, yoga, meditation, a lot of physical work. I grew up as an athlete, and so I knew the power of exercise. I knew the power in the body, and I knew that using the body to get me out of the mind could help me flip the script, and we can do that whenever we want. So the prison lies in the story, the subconscious feeds that we don't have the choice, that we have to cling to these ideas. And so I got this coin so that I had a physical, tangible reminder of the freedom the reality of the freedom that we have to choose our perspective at any moment. And I'm talking, this is my methodology. For me, this works because it is a physical thing that reminds me of that idea. It's the same idea of people who have a problem drinking, and so they get their Alcoholic Anonymous coins, something to remind them of that. So to sum it up, it's training. It's mental training, really. Studying, believing, really believing that these 2,000-year-old ideas have been time tested, that other people have gone through them. That's why having mentors like Seneca, like Marcus Aurelius, is so important to me, because it's you read their history and they went through it, so you trust that. And it takes faith, it takes strength, it takes training, it takes resilience, and it takes tools. It takes tools like this, or mentors, or whatever you have to do. Another line that I really love is, let's train our mind to desire what the situation demands. And that's what it comes down to. You do what it takes.
So given the things you've just outlined, do you think there's anything someone could be dealing with that they couldn't handle without the proper support? Or do you think the problem with most people and the things that they're dealing with is they haven't met the right person who can open their mind to the right subject, or give them the right terminology, or the right philosophy, or the right healing modality? Have you met anyone? You're like, honestly, I have no idea what to do for you.
No, I actually do tell everybody that there is nothing that we can't overcome. Absolutely. Through the studies that I've done, through the experience that I've had, through studying my mentors, the philosophers, through learning from my dad, who was a big influence on me, and through what he went through, I know for a fact, there's nothing that we cannot overcome using all the knowledge we have, using our body, using the wisdom in our body, learning how our body works, learning how to tap into that potential. We have infinite potential in our bodies that is being overlooked in modern society, I believe. I've watched it, I've experienced it, and using nature alone and our body, which is nature, we are nature, so tapping into what the universe created for us, we can absolutely overcome anything at all. Definitely.
And would you say, you're very passionate and very firm about that. And do you think that sort of sense of firmness is what would allow us to actually, if you actually genuinely believe that you can overcome anything, that's something you're essentially instilling in someone that you're working with. Am I correct?
Oh, absolutely. The placebo is very real. If you just believe something, that raises your chances of overcoming it by like 30%. That's a big head start, So I always tell people, just believe it. Believe it. You're already 30%. You just have 74% more to go. It's better than 100% to go. Right. Absolutely.
So psilocybin's obviously played a large role in your life. What is it unique about the psilocybin experience in, say, the contrast to mescaline or LSD that it was particularly beneficial for you and helped remove, this sort of, hanging sense of fear and doubt and shame, etc.? What is it about mushrooms?
The mushroom definitely found me. I've had such a special lifelong relationship with it. I have also done LSD. I recently did my ayahuasca journey for the first time a few weeks ago. I have done Bufo, 5-MeO, DMT. I'm a big fan of DMT. Very powerful as well, in a different way, which I would say I'm equally interested in DMT. But mushrooms are a more gentle form of getting you out of that storyline of that default mode. It feels a bit more organic than say Bufo that just blasts you out into hyperspace in 2 seconds. So it's easier to work with. I think it's definitely the first entheogen that I suggest people use if they're embarking on plant medicine.
So you would say for depression, anxiety, etc., your go-to would be mushrooms. Is that correct?
Yes, definitely.
Right, because I think it's important to sort of understand what does this smorgasbord of entheogens really help us with, and it seems like your ability to be able to direct someone to this or that is incredibly important. And so something you wrote in your book that I really liked was it said, that the new space frontier is the inner space frontier, and that inward expansion you can achieve. Where does that take us, and where could it take us, and what do you see to be kind of cutting edge as far as our explorations of that inward journey?
Right. Yeah, it's fascinating how much we are fascinated by things like AI, artificial intelligence, how we use all the technology we have to go out into space, to colonize Mars, to try and get away from the problems on Earth, when we don't have that same fascination with the intelligence that is created by nature, by our bodies, what's inside. It doesn't seem to be nearly as much focus or fascination on researching and learning what we already have, what we've had throughout our evolution. And so liberation of the mind, I have come to learn, besides entheogens, is using the body, because the body's intelligence is infinite, and there is an internal universe that is just as infinite as space. And even scientifically, we know that looking into our bodies, into everything, really, it's about the same ratio of space inside as there is outside. So there is an infinite amount of wisdom if we look inward, and that's where we tap into the self and into ourself, and that is where we see that continuum where we become one. And I've had these experiences many times on psychedelic journeys, where you go so far into your soul that you become infinite, and you realize how much space and how much infinity is inside of your body. And so, Jason Silva says that the new space is inner space. I believe that's what we need to do. We need to harness the power that we already have, that we've been born with. And by focusing inward, since it is a continuum, whatever's inside is outside. If you're tapping into whatever emotions you're going through, if you are angry, if you're tapping into your anger, then around you, you're going to kind of find that you're going to attract anger as well. So whatever you are cultivating from inside is what you are attracting from the outside. It is all a continuum. This is the great things that psychedelics bring, is you feel that continuum of infinity very clearly, and way beyond the analytical mind, way beyond the thinking brain. You know in your body, in your soul, your body's intuition knows that it's real, and you walk away from the experience knowing that it's more real than this reality itself. So it's extremely powerful, infinitely powerful, and we already have it. So I always advocate, if we have an issue, let's dive in, because it's coming from inside. There's nothing external that's causing the problems. It's always inside.
And so you did mention meditation, yoga is a part of your routine. Have you had any meditative experiences or breathwork experiences that paralleled the psychedelic experience? And if so, would you describe their similarities or differences?
Absolutely. I'm a big fan of cyclical hyperventilation, Wim Hof style breathing. I got into that right away when the mushrooms liberated me back 5 years ago. Very, very powerful. I've had experiences just as powerful as the psychedelic experience, where you reach that state of oneness, that connection with everything. What happens in the brain is very similar when you do cyclical hyperventilation, many types of breathwork. The quieting the default mode network, the interconnectedness of the brain, is very similar patterns that occur. And so you can definitely get to these psychedelic states through breathwork. That is what I teach. I started doing breathwork classes about 2 years ago, and they grew in popularity very quickly. And my intention was to actually bring people out of their mode, their default mode, in a natural way through breath. For people especially who were scared of trying mushrooms or trying psychedelics, I think it's a great first step to getting into that psychedelic realm. And in that way, everybody can experience that realm without having any fear of any repercussions, really, because breathwork is very safe, you know. On top of that's just one aspect of the breathwork that's so powerful, but what happens physiologically, I mean, it's very healthy for you. Air is the thing that we need most in life. It's the thing we would die the quickest without. So in general, the more oxygen you breathe, the healthier you're going to be. So I also teach the importance of doing breathwork daily, of really maximizing the amount of oxygen you're able to breathe and training yourself to retrain your nervous system to really tap into that and to start breathing correctly, because that in itself can eliminate a lot of illnesses. I know several people, some case studies in my book, who mitigate bipolar disorder, who mitigate multiple sclerosis through breathwork alone. So in the breath itself is infinite potential as well. This is also part of the idea of the new space is inner space. You know, we have the solutions to resolve many illnesses with just breath alone.
So say someone wanted to get started doing breath work, would you say, hey, type into YouTube conscious breath work, or watch a Wim Hof video, or what would be something that's accessible that the average person could go, yeah, that was really cool, and kind of get on their path, as opposed to necessarily going to a park or, you know, something more formal?
Yeah, there actually are a lot of YouTube videos on Wim Hof. That's the first way that I learned about it, is just typing up a YouTube video. It's not that complicated of a breathwork practice, so it can be learned very easily. It's very accessible. Just YouTube Wim Hof, and you can see he actually has a free mini class that you can just Google free mini class, and it can be that easy to learn. Really, it's definitely better and more effective if you go to a workshop, somebody leads you through it, because again, you can kind of get into that psychedelic realm. So what happens if you try and do it by yourself? A lot of times you'll just fall asleep because you go into you're kind of shutting down that prefrontal cortex, you know. So it is difficult if you don't know how to do it to start on your own. I was able to because I was very determined, because I was very depressed and I just had to get out of it. So I had no choice. But it's hard to start. If you have somebody to train you, it's definitely more effective. And when you feel the effectiveness, then you're more likely to continue with that. So I do suggest finding a mentor or a trainer or a teacher of some sort. But it is accessible. You can just YouTube Wim Hof breathing.
Awesome. So we have the Change Your Lens series, where we ask a set list of a number of questions to every guest, so we could have hopefully hundreds of different takes on these, let's see, I don't know, 10 or 12 District 216 questions. So if you don't mind, we're going to start off with the first one. It was, what person or book had the greatest influence on your life? Is that still Tim Ferriss, or did you change your mind?
That was the first one, and then that led to the Stoics, of course. So Meditations by Marcus Aurelius, Letters from a Stoic by Seneca, the Enchiridion by Epictetus. I also love the Four Agreements. That was one of the books that really influenced me on simplifying my view of life and following those four tenets. And by following those four tenets of being impeccable with the word, never taking anything personal, and not making assumptions, and always doing your best. You know, if you do those four, then you can avoid a lot of problems in life. So I found that very applicable and very universally applicable, because most people can understand those ideas. They're pretty simple. And it really made an impact on me, as well as The Power of Now by Eckhart Tolle, and the idea of the present moment. And so with those alone, and tying in the original idea from Tim Ferriss of the 80-20 principle, which is what I learned from the 4-hour work week, I was able to just focus on those four books right there. You know, and those four books really made such an 80% difference in my life. So I would say those are my biggest influences as far as books.
Very important question. Do we live in a simulation?
Yes, but I would call it more of a collective consciousness, because it's not exactly a simulation, one simulation that we're all in, but more like a multiverse where everybody's universe depends on the perception from that organism. There's no environment that exists without the perception of the thing perceiving the environment. So so this physical reality seems to be, and this is what I've felt in many of my psychedelic journeys, that seems to be the interface where all organisms can coexist and all physical matter can coexist. But since every environment is dependent on the perception of infinite amount of beings and organisms and matter itself, then that is what, in a sense, is a simulation. So nobody is living the same reality, but yet we're all living in this physical universe. So it's a little more complicated than simulation, I would say, but it's not one reality.
That was a great answer. That might be my favorite so far. Do you believe in an afterlife? If so, do psychedelics give us any insight into potentially what that could be?
You're going to love this one.
Okay. Did you hear what I said?
Yes.
Okay, perfect.
Again, in my psychedelic experiences, I have felt the answer to this question, that it's much broader than whether there's an afterlife. The reality of our existence, I believe, is, and this can be broken down scientifically, that our bodies have been constructed from stardust, by the sun, by the solar system, from the beginning of time. Our cells have been in creation since the beginning of time. So existence itself encompasses so much more than just this life. This life is a tiny, tiny sliver of all existence. And since we are interconnected with everything, we are part of everything. We are a part of that entire creation of the universe. So the way that I view life and existence itself is in that way. So it's, to me, it's more of a question of not whether there's an afterlife, but just how small is it, this life that we are perceiving, in comparison to the reality of the infinity of what we are. So I feel that life is infinite, much grander than an afterlife, if that makes sense.
No, that's a great answer. Is there a substance you haven't tried yet you would really like to, or a substance you have tried that you never want to touch again?
Yes, I never, ever want to do Xanax again.
I thought you were going to say salvia or...
No, or Adderall. Okay. Or any sort of pill. But I do need to try mescaline, because I have not yet. And when I was in Mexico recently, I saw a spiritual healer who told me that because my ancestors are the Tarahumara from northern Mexico, that the peyote would help reconnect me with my ancestors. And it was a very deep, powerful session, very deep conversation. So it actually is something that I need to do because it's one of my missions. So definitely peyote and mescaline.
And so in the context of this modern kind of psychedelic renaissance, if we want to call it that, what are you most excited for, and what do you see the future being? Ideally, in the best case scenario.
There's so much potential with so much. Right now, currently, what we have to solve is a mental health crisis. So that's imperative. That comes first. That is exciting because that means liberation of the human mind, the liberation of a lot of suffering. So of course I'm very excited about that. That's the work that I'm doing, and so that's my life. What I'm very excited about, though, is the next step after that, is when we can move beyond the suffering and get into the realm of existentialism and really starting to ask the big questions of, why are we here? What is this real? What is the nature of reality? When our whole species collectively starts to think this way, that's where I think evolution will really catalyze. And so that's what I'm very excited about, is the ability for psychedelics to take us to that level of existence and of evolution, rather than just getting out of suffering. Because suffering, again, because of my belief, because of the book, because of who I am, suffering is not necessary. So I think it's inevitable that we will end this suffering. But again, what's really exciting is the next level of existence, of let's start thinking about the big questions that really matter.
And so lastly, what is the nature of consciousness in under 60 seconds? You've touched upon it, so if you want to, give it 30 seconds, I'll accept that.
65 seconds.
I wish I had my Apple Watch.
The best way I can describe that is something called the Law of One that dictates that we all came from the sun, essentially. Everything came from the sun. And the sun came from the one conscious, the one creator, the logos, which is the divine wisdom that's manifest in creation. And from this one creation, there is a fragmentation of consciousness and a stepping down of consciousness into what can be called a personalized vantage point of the universe, which every organism is. And we are a vantage point of the universe. You are the universe looking at me, I'm the universe looking at you, you guys are the universe looking at me. We're all the same one. It's just a fragmentation of the one consciousness. And the purpose of that is the universe learning about itself. And so existence goes through this process, through expansion of the universe, experience. Everything is experience. Everybody's experiencing something. And then that eventually, when the sun dies, it will get swallowed up into a black hole, and the inverse of that process occurs. And then all that information gets sucked into the black hole, and then the black hole spits out possibly another universe. But it learns and takes forward what it learned during that existence in itself. So in 5 seconds, we are the universe learning about ourselves.
That was fantastic. Can we get a round of applause for Gerardo? And he's going to give us a presentation now.
Hi, my name's Gerardo Urias. 3 years ago, I was living the life of my dreams, living on the Caribbean in Mexico. I owned my own business. I was married to a beautiful woman. I was traveling a lot, spending most of my days on the beach. Life was just incredible. It was epic. And then life took a major turn. I got divorced. My dad died right after we separated. I was going deaf. I had some major health issues. I ended up losing my business, my money, my home, and along with everything that was dear to me, my desire to live. The world grew darker every day for 10 months until I reached the brink of suicide.
I didn't know how to get out of it. It was going straight towards, a very bad ending. There was really nothing I could do to get out. I tried therapy, I tried antidepressants, I tried everything. One day, my brother suggested magic mushrooms for depression, and I didn't think it would work.
Within about an hour of eating the mushrooms, I literally felt the depression dissipate, dissolve, and vanish.
It started ramping up, and we walked on the pier, everything started slowing down, and I just noticed that I felt good. And then all of a sudden, boom, this euphoria. Wow, it was just magical. How could you take me from one day where I just wanted to kill myself to the next day being happy?
That sparked my rapid and dramatic recovery that began a transformative, magical 2-year journey that eventually led me to the majestic mountains of southern Oaxaca in Mexico. It's my hope to bring you on this journey with me by telling you a story of courage, adversity, resilience, family, love, and hope. By sharing my story, I hope to raise awareness for these life-saving plant medicines, practices, and philosophies that keep me thriving every day. It's unreal the power these mushrooms hold. What they did that day was open my eyes to the reality that I had closed off, to my mind, and make me fall in love with life again, just like that. It was insane. It's time to reawaken our incredible inner power. It's time to reconnect with nature. It's time to evolve.
I wanted to tell my story in a visual way because a lot of people don't have time to read a book, and I really enjoy making videos, and I have spent a few years in Mexico in the most amazing places, the most amazing scenery, and so I have luckily some very talented friends who are very good videographers, and so we're currently working on that, and hopefully that'll be out in the next year or two. And there's a lot that's happened since the publishing of the book, since we started filming this documentary, and so I wanted to tell you some of the journey outside of the publishing of the book and the story of the book itself, because I published it during COVID, actually. And there's been, the book in itself is my story of my downfall and then my rise out of it. However, I was really hoping that would stay that way, but that's not how life works. So then it went back down again, and there's been a lot that's happened since. So I'm going to tell you a little bit about my current journey. But first we'll go back quite a few years back to high school, to when, right out of high school, my best friend and I both got kicked out of our house for being young marijuana smoking rebels. And so during those years, we were really doing nothing with our life, and we were just kind of partying away in San Diego. And we ended up going to a rave called Narnia in the summer of 1997, and that's where we first tried MDMA. And during our experience in Snow Valley, California, in a beautiful forest behind us, was just incredible. We had this crazy idea to move to Germany to go snowboard for the winter. And this is the beautiful town of Garmisch, Germany that we moved to. It's just like living inside of a postcard, and that's where I first started snowboarding. And it was that decision that was sparked by MDMA changed my entire life, of course, but these years became the 3 of the best years of my life. It was just unreal, absolutely unreal. And let me show you some pictures of Garmisch in the spring. So that was our playground, those mountains behind. We would go up and snowboard and ski those mountains every day, and then we worked down in the valley there. And back there is looking the other direction. The mountains you see in the back there, that's the border of Austria. And we would go hiking through there and just eat mushrooms and go hiking and all that stuff. It was so incredible. It absolutely changed our life. Especially my life. My friends ended up moving back home about a year later, but I stayed 3 years. And it was during these years where I first experienced the idea of tribe. True authentic connection and shared passions with my friends, as we skied some of the best and biggest mountains in the world. The bonding that occurs when you have those shared experiences that I equate to a psychedelic experience. Actually, for me, deep powder skiing is the ultimate. It's even far beyond psychedelics. That is my passion, my ultimate passion. This is also through my love of skiing and snowboarding where I discovered the idea of flow and flow state. But I wouldn't know what that term meant, of course, until I started my research for the book in 2018. But I now realize that my entire life has been an inadvertent experiment in flow state living, because I never stopped traveling and skiing, and I chased the waves and surfing and the snow for the next 2 decades. And I just intuitively knew that the way that I was living life is the way that life ought to be lived. And while everybody back home, my friends were climbing the corporate ladder and chasing that dream, I just wasn't able to assimilate back into that mindset, and I just never stopped to this day. And I still keep doing it. But what I also realized through psychedelic medicines from the experience of getting kicked out of my house is that these early traumas that the psychedelic experiences allowed me to tap into and realize these parts of myself is that I developed a tendency to run away from situations. And then what I realize now in hindsight is that I have been running away my whole life. However, that also, because of those early traumas, I have been able to see the world and have the most incredible experiences that a lot of my friends are jealous of. And so this is where I can see the continuity and the both sides of the coin, that yes, trauma is difficult and shapes you into a person who can have dysfunctions like running away for your whole life. But on the flip side of that, there's so much potential in what you can harness from trauma itself. Dr. Gabor Mate has a documentary called The Wisdom of Trauma, which means there's infinite potential in trauma itself. So trauma itself isn't only bad. This is us in these days in Garmisch-Partenkirchen, and then we would travel to Spain. This was during the running of the bulls, a wild week that we had there in Spain. I'm over there in the corner. I don't even remember that picture being taken. And this is in Thailand after about a year. We traveled to Southeast Asia and spent some time in Thailand. That's me trying to kill myself. That's me trying to kill myself again. Shortly after arriving in Germany, we started traveling around, and we quickly made our way to Amsterdam. That's me with some snakes trying to kill myself again. This brings us to Amsterdam, where we first started to really experiment with mushrooms, because back then mushrooms were still legal. In 2008, there were some unfortunate incidents that made the government change the laws on that. Now they can only sell truffles, the subterranean part of the mushrooms, but they were still legal when we first arrived there. And so we really started to experiment with them back then, but this was in 1997, long before sentence setting. So by experiment, as Cole and I were discussing earlier, we ate a few grams of mushrooms and would go skiing or biking or any other adrenaline-filled activity. Very dangerous, of course, but we were in our 20s and we were just charging through life. These were definitely some of the most magical times of my life, you know, peering over the Zugspitze into Austria. And it was all fun and games one day until we ate a few grams of mushrooms, went snowboarding, and my best friend flew out of the trees and crashed into me during the peak of the trip. I thought he broke my leg. Not a good idea to be tripping on mushrooms in the backcountry in the middle of nowhere because, of course, that was part of our experiments as well, to get into the most dangerous situations possible and make it out alive. After an hour of gathering my strength, we snowboarded back to the bottom of the mountain, and upon inspection of my leg, I saw it wasn't broken, so naturally, we kept snowboarding. There was nothing more important in those days than getting fresh tracks, even on a half-broken leg on mushrooms. And then there was a time that we ate mushrooms and went skiing, and I accidentally cut off an old lady. And she ended up catching up to me, yelling at me and punching me in the face when she saw me at the bottom. True story. I'll never forget her bright purple glove slowly making its way to my face, unable to do anything about it. Needless to say, we figured out eventually that skiing and snowboarding and eating mushrooms is not a good idea. So that's not what I'm advocating here. We were lucky that I didn't actually break my leg and that old lady didn't break my face. However, on the more serious side of things, not all of us made it out alive of those days. On one occasion, sans mushrooms, no mushrooms, during a real ski trip to northern Italy that I was supposed to go to, but I had to work. Two of my friends got caught in an avalanche in terrain that looked much like this. These pictures were taken in Switzerland. This is in Austria, so these were the mountains we were skiing. And my German friend Alex ended up dying, and my other American friend almost lost his life. After he was dug up by ski patrol and rehabilitated, the German government charged him with involuntary manslaughter for the involvement in the death of a German citizen, as they were out of bounds of the ski area, something we did often in our 20s. And he had to leave Germany or face jail time. His whole life was upended. If I had gone on that trip, there's no doubt I'd have charged that line first and I'd be dead as well. That was the most important day for me to not ditch work. I will ask for a moment of silence for Alex and for some of the friends that I've lost since those days. This brings me to the idea of memento mori, an integral part of Stoic philosophy, which is a philosophy that I try and follow, as we discussed earlier. It's a big part of my book and story. It's the ancient Greek practice of reflecting on our mortality. I carry this coin in my pocket to remind me of that idea. On the back it says, "You can leave life right now." And the full quote is from Marcus Aurelius. It says, "You can leave life right now, let that determine what you do and say and think." Again, it's a tangible reminder of reality that we can go at any minute. The most important idea for me. So it creates urgency in my life for the things that are important, like writing a book, like healing people, like spreading this knowledge. These were absolutely the best years of my life because we really were, many times, literally living life on the edge. As Jimmy Chin says in his latest film, Edge of the Unknown, which is about extreme sports, sometimes the only way to find the edge is to go over it. And unfortunately, some of my friends have gone over that edge. Fast forward a decade or so after a trial run of the normal life in the US, which I just couldn't get used to, and I found myself with a wife who felt the same, and we decided to sell all of our belongings, move to Panama, start a business of our own, and we ended up in Mexico 2 years later, living the dream. This picture is taken in a massive cave. It's a restaurant in a cenote, which means massive cave in Playa del Carmen, if you've ever been there. And this picture was taken a few blocks from the vacation rental business that we owned, very successful. We were really living the dream, but a party and alcohol-infused life on the Caribbean and Mexico is just not sustainable, especially for a marriage. Who would have thought? Playa del Carmen ripped our marriage apart in 1 year's time. Impressive. And if you've ever been there, you know why. This led to my divorce and my downfall and my severe depression, which then led to the abrupt dissipation of my depression with magic mushrooms, which we spoke about earlier on this beach in Oceanside, California. This is what my book is about, so I won't go into too much detail here. This brings us to 2018, the beginning of my healing journey. The next 2 years of my recovery were absolute magic as I began writing Taking Back My Mind. You really couldn't catch me on a bad day. This is in part because I was also going deaf during my marriage. An interesting epiphany I had recently about my inability to listen to my wife or to the universe. And within a year of my liberating depression, I had surgery on both ears and I can hear again for the first time in years. So you couldn't catch me on a bad day. You couldn't ruin my day for that next year and a half, because if you've ever had a disability where you lost a sense and regained it, there's nothing more important in life. I memorized this quote from Epictetus to remember this feeling and this fact. Do not indulge of dreams of having what you have not, but reckon up the chief of the blessings you do possess, and then thankfully remember how you would crave them if they were not yours. I remember what it was like not hearing for 3 years. This honeymoon period was amazing, but it did come to an end when the realities and consequences of my mission began to surface. An inherent part of the healing journey is waking up to our traumas and our triggers, especially our early life traumas. As I confronted these traumas and started voicing the effects they had on me, my relationships began to crumble. It is hard to elevate our well-being in environments in which trauma is a white elephant in the room. I began to realize how much my environment and my relationships played a role in my healing or my lack of healing. The most difficult part of my journey had just begun. There were people and behaviors that I could no longer allow to affect my health or my well-being. I had to slowly shed many relationships, a very difficult and tumultuous journey. This brings me to the main message that I do wish to share today. The journey of awakening is anything but easy and fun. Especially in Mexican and Latin cultures, family is of the utmost importance. And acting against family norms is unacceptable, even in the face of toxic or abusive behavior. These inherited norms have been written in our DNA and carried forward for thousands of years in a sort of inherited family template. I believe we must begin to change these norms and these templates. It is up to our generation to break these cycles. These family templates live deep in our subconscious. There are very few things in existence that can help reveal them to us. Psychedelics are one such method. Psychedelic therapy can help us cut through the layers of conditioning, allowing us to see our traumas and our dysfunctions, therefore giving us the opportunity to rewrite our hereditary story and our genetic codes, in turn healing everyone in our lineage from our ancestors to future generations. My original journey in Oaxaca, when we started filming the documentary, inevitably culminated into a message for my family as a result of our then recent fallout, in an effort to raise awareness for these inherited traumas and cycles of behavior. I would like to show you just a short clip of this message. It's a very personal and emotional message, I have to warn you.
And for my final message, this all culminated into what is the first step I'm going to do so that I can become a better person and so I can start helping others, aside from this documentary and the book. And so it naturally formulated into a message for my family. Familia Urias. We've struggled our whole lives to stay united, and it's failed. Decades have passed with dysfunctional communication. And the severing of relationships due to holding on to pain and trauma. We're on this earth for a very short time. We've already lost Papi. Mums will not be around much longer. We're all in the last half of our lives. Do we want to live that last half in the same pain and suffering, ununited, unable to truly connect? I don't want to. Everything I've done and keep doing is finding the solution to this, and the solution lies here in these practices, in these plant medicines. I urge you all to seriously consider taking the step necessary to resolve your individual traumas. Enabling our true selves to connect for the first time ever, free from the prison of the ego, which we all have. We can do this. That's all.
That was filmed in 2019. And because of my path and the revealing of my early traumas, the chasm between my family and I has only grown bigger. Trauma entanglements and stubborn trauma bonds remain in power. It is my continual hope that one day plant medicine might allow us to see past the egos and the mental constructs that keep feeding this chasm. That one day plant medicine will reveal to us that we are all in fact one. I was recently on a good friend's podcast where we focused on psychedelics and family, as this is the most important topic of my life. Here's a short clip of Susan Gunner's podcast called the Psychedelic Conversations Podcast.
Not having these plant medicines that we've had throughout our evolution, throughout humanity, that bring these spiritual experiences, those bonding experiences, it's natural to me that there's so many issues because we're not using the tools that nature gave us. So let's normalize them. Let's bring them into relationships, into marriage counseling, into family therapy. We have safe, non-toxic, non-addictive, miracle molecules that were mostly made by nature that are solving a lot of problems. Let's lose the fear and let's evolve. We need to evolve, you know? So let's use the tools.
It's been a very difficult, challenging, and at times crushing journey, especially recently. I have had to reread my own book several times just to stay strong, to remember the stories, practices, and philosophies that jolted me out of depression in 2018. The most important of these stories being the story of my father. When I arrived in Oaxaca last year to begin setting up our ascension retreats, I was led to a spiritual healer named Inez who looked into my eyes and saw 5 generations of my ancestors trying to guide me. We talked about this a little bit earlier with Cole, but I'd become disconnected from them. After several cleansing and purging exercises, she had me yell out my father's name and my grandfather's name. She had me yell out as loud as I could, "Yo soy Leopoldo Urias," was my father's name, and "Yo soy Rosario Urias," my grandfather's name and my mother's name. In an effort to call them into my life, she said that they're always listening. There was some smoke and herb cleansing and many prayers. It was a very powerful session. I actually have had many encounters with my ancestors since that cleansing, and many life-changing experiences as a result. On one occasion recently, during a high-dose mushroom journey, my father visited me as I became him and he became me. I had a conversation with him about healing our family as I spoke to myself as him. That's the best way I can describe it. It was ineffable, of course, but there was a moment where we merged into one. It was the most profound experience of my life. I have felt my father as a part of me ever since. He also visited me in a dream once to deliver a very important message about my book that was no coincidence. And when I woke up for the next few hours, I felt like I had smoked bufo. There was a very clear activation of DMT in my body, which I'm very familiar with because of my bufo 5-MeO and breathwork experiences. And that's the only time that's ever happened. There's no doubt that he visited me. As mentioned, my path has been anything but easy. It takes a tremendous amount of resilience, patience, and strength to continue doing what I'm doing in the face of so much adversity and resistance. But I know I can do it because I know who my father was. I would like to introduce you to a man named Gerardo Urias. After leaving our grandparents' ranch in the mountains of Sinaloa barefoot at 16 years old to search for a better life, he encountered obstacle after obstacle throughout his life and evaded death so many times. He was in many accidents in which he could have easily died, but his lust for life, his strength and resilience, and his devotion to his family kept him alive. After ditching his doctor's advice that he would never walk again and probably live only a few more years after a death-defying accident in a cement truck during a workday before I was born, in which the truck lost its traction and went barreling over a big cliff, sustaining a broken back and multiple internal injuries, he turned to nature, eventually started running long distances barefoot, and lived to the ripe old age of 90. There's many stories I could tell you about my father, but I've detailed his life in my book, and it would take hours for you to understand just who he was. What I can tell you is that he was an absolute warrior, a healer, and the toughest man I've ever known. This is a picture of him about to summit the iconic Popocatépetl volcano outside of Mexico City, rising up to 5,426 meters barefoot. He was a Tarahumara, which is our lineage, who are known as some of the best long-distance runners in the world. The Tarahumara don't like wearing shoes. He never wore shoes his entire life except for social events and work. He ran many marathons and half marathons barefoot, just as our ancestors did, and as the Tarahumara continue to do in Copper Canyon, Mexico. Only 3 of our climbing team made it to the summit that day, and he outclimbed all of them barefoot. Here's another picture of him running a half marathon barefoot in Tijuana, Mexico at 70 years old. If you notice in this picture, he's missing his right arm. Whenever things get tough for me, I remember this picture and this story. And this is how I know I will continue my mission no matter how difficult things get, no matter what stands in my way. Because I carry the DNA of a man who, after so many near-death experiences, who after so much adversity was yet in another work accident in which his right hand got caught in the gears of the giant crane he was working on. And as it began to devour him alive, he quickly and swiftly, with great strength and astonishing might, ripped his own arm off at the elbow and walked himself to the office to save his own life, as he was the only one working that day. When he woke up at the hospital several days later, surrounded by crying family and one less arm, he looked up at all of us and said, "¿Quién se murió?" which means, "Who died?" and laughed. True story. He then learned to write with his left hand and continued running long distances barefoot. He never stopped smiling, he never stopped loving life, and he never stopped fighting for his life since that fateful day. When asked how he was doing, he would always say, "Mejor que ayer, pero peor que mañana," which means better than yesterday, but worse than tomorrow. He was the epitome of Stoic philosophy, long before I had ever even heard of this philosophy. And so it is, just as Ines had me yell out in Oaxaca, Mexico last year, I am Leopoldo Urias. I am Rosario Urias, grandfather and mother. Therefore, in honor of my father, who lives on in me, I will never stop fighting for our freedom to explore our own consciousness, for the preservation of nature, an ancient indigenous wisdom that lives in my DNA, for the betterment of humanity, and for sovereignty and autonomy over our own health, no matter what obstacle stands in my way. Because as Marcus Aurelius would have said, the obstacle is the way. And I will do my best to never stop smiling, just as my father did. I would like to end with a quote I read a few years ago that really resonated with me and keeps me going when times are tough and I start to question my mission. In honor of my Hispanic brothers and sisters who may find themselves in similar situations and predicaments as I do, as our ancestral baggage runs deep. For all the black sheep of their families, we are the black sheep of society. The so-called black sheep of the family are in fact hunters born of paths of liberation into the family tree, the members of a tree who do not conform to the norms of tradition or traditions of the family system, those who since childhood have constantly sought to revolutionize beliefs, going against the paths marked by family traditions, those criticized, judged, and even rejected. These are usually called to free the tree of repetitive stories that frustrate entire generations. The black sheep, those who do not adapt, those who cry rebelliously, play a basic role within each family system. They repair, pick up, unfold, and create new branches in the family tree. Thanks to these members, our trees renew their roots. Its rebellion is fertile soil. Its madness is water that nourishes. Its stubbornness is new air. Its passion is fire that reignites the light of the heart of the ancestors. Uncountable repressed desires, unfulfilled dreams, and the frustrated talents of our ancestors are manifested in the rebelliousness of these black sheep seeking fulfillment. The genealogical tree, by inertia, will want to continue to maintain the castrating and toxic course of its trunk, which makes the task of our sheep a difficult and conflicting work. However, who would bring new flowers to our tree if it were not for them? Who would create new branches? Without them, the unfulfilled dreams of those who supported the tree generations ago would die buried beneath their own roots. Let no one cause you to doubt. Take care of your rarity as the most precious flower of your tree. You are the dream of all your ancestors. That's attributed to Bert Hellinger. Thank you.